mansion stood on top of a quiet hill, shining with white marble walls and tall glass windows that reflected the evening sun. From far away, it looked peaceful and perfect. People in the city often pointed toward it and whispered about the powerful man who lived there. He owned companies across the world. His name appeared in magazines. Cameras followed him. Reporters waited outside his office. He had everything that money could buy. But inside the mansion that evening, there was no peace. The long hallway that usually echoed with polite greetings and soft footsteps now felt heavy and silent. The air smelled faintly of medicine. Machines made quiet beeping sounds in one of the large bedrooms upstairs. Curtains were drawn halfway, allowing only a small line of sunlight to fall across the bed. On that bed lay his mother. She had once been a strong woman with bright eyes and a steady voice. She had raised her son alone after her husband passed away many years ago. She had worked long hours in a small shop when he was young. She had skipped meals so he could eat. She had sold her jewelry to pay his school fees. And when he became successful, she never asked for anything in return. Now her hands looked thin and pale against the white blanket. Her breathing was slow and uneven. Tubes and wires surrounded her. Expensive medical equipment filled the room. The best doctors in the country had come and gone over the past week. Some had flown in from other cities in private jets. Some had stayed overnight, studying reports and test results. But none of them had good news. The billionaire stood near the window, staring at the garden below. He had not slept properly in days. His tie was loose. His hair, usually perfectly styled, looked slightly messy. He held his phone in his hand, but for once he was not answering calls. A senior doctor cleared his throat gently. "We have tried everything available," the doctor said in a careful voice. "Her body is not responding to treatment. We are doing our best." He hated that sentence. We are doing our best. What did that even mean? His best meant signing deals worth millions in a single afternoon. His best meant solving problems quickly. His best meant winning. But this was different. "Bring someone else," he said quietly, not turning around. "Another specialist. I don't care about the cost." The doctor looked down for a moment. It is not about money. That answer hurt more than anything. Because money had always been the solution. When business partners doubted him, money proved them wrong. When competitors tried to block him, money opened new doors. When problems appeared, money fixed them. But here, standing beside his mother's bed, money felt useless. Downstairs, the house staff moved softly, speaking in whispers. They had worked in the mansion for years. They had seen grand parties, important guests, and celebrations. But they had never seen their employer like this. Quiet, broken, and lost. Among them was the housemaid, a woman in her early 40s who had served the family faithfully for a long time. She cleaned the rooms, prepared tea, and helped care for the elderly woman even before the illness became serious. She had always been treated with respect, though she knew her place in the house. For the past few days, she had barely left the mansion. She felt deeply worried for the elderly woman, who had always spoken kindly to her. Sometimes, after finishing her work, she would stand outside the bedroom door, listening to the slow beeping of the machines. She would close her eyes and whisper a small prayer. That evening, her teenage daughter was also in the house. The girl usually came after school to help her mother for a few hours before they returned to their small apartment in the city. She was quiet, observant, and curious about everything. Her eyes noticed details that others often missed. She had grown up watching her mother work hard. She understood what struggle looked like. She also knew what gratitude meant. When she entered the mansion that day, she immediately felt the tension in the air. No one smiled. No one chatted. Even the guards at the gate looked serious. She helped her mother in the kitchen for a while, washing dishes and arranging trays. But her attention kept drifting upstairs. "What happened today?" she whispered. Her mother sighed. "Doctors came again. They changed some medicines. But..." She paused. "But what? They say there is very little hope." The girl's hands froze for a second. She had seen the elderly woman many times. She remembered how the old lady used to ask her about school. She would say, "Study well. Education is something no one can steal." Felt strange to imagine her gone. Later that evening, another specialist arrived. He carried a black bag and a serious expression. The billionaire greeted him with forced politeness and led him upstairs. The girl, curious, quietly walked closer to the staircase. She did not go up. She simply sat on the lower steps, pretending to adjust her shoe while listening. Voices floated down from the hallway above. "Her symptoms are unusual," one doctor said. "It could be a rare infection," another replied. "We have already tested for that. There is organ weakness developing." The billionaire's voice cut through the discussion. "Stop talking in circles. Tell me clearly. Can she recover?" There was a long silence. "We cannot promise anything," someone answered. The girl looked down at the floor. Something about the conversation did not sit right with her. She did not fully understand the medical terms, but she had heard enough to sense confusion. Her grandmother, who had lived in their village before passing away, had always believed in careful observation. She used to say, "Listen to the body. It tells you what it needs." The girl remembered helping her grandmother prepare simple herbal mixtures for people in the village. They were not miracles, but sometimes they worked when nothing else did. Not because they were magic, but because her grandmother paid attention. She shook her head slightly, telling herself not to think too much. These were world-class doctors upstairs. What did she know compared to them? Hours passed. The sky outside turned dark. Lights in the mansion glowed warmly, but the feeling inside remained cold. Around midnight, one of the nurses stepped out of the room and quietly informed the billionaire that his mother's condition had become more critical. He rushed inside. The machines beeped faster now. Doctors moved quickly. Instructions were given. Adjustments were made. The maid stood near the doorway, holding her breath. The girl watched from behind her mother. For the first time, she saw fear clearly on the billionaire's face. Not the fear of losing money, not the fear of losing power, but the fear of losing the only person who had loved him before he became successful. He held his mother's hand carefully, as if afraid she might disappear. "Stay with me," he whispered. The doctors worked for what felt like forever. Finally, the situation stabilized, but only slightly. A senior doctor walked toward him again. His expression said everything before his words did. "We are reaching the limit of what medicine can do," he said gently. "You should prepare yourself. Prepare yourself." Those words echoed in the large room. The billionaire closed his eyes. For a moment, he was not a powerful businessman. He was just a son. Downstairs, the maid sat on a small chair in the corner of the kitchen. Her daughter sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Then the girl quietly said, "Amy, may I ask something?" Her mother looked at her. What if they are missing something simple?" Her mother frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I heard them talking. They sound unsure. What if the medicines are reacting badly? What if her body cannot handle something they are giving?" Her mother quickly shook her head. "Don't say such things. These are big doctors." "I know," the girl replied softly. "But even big people can make small mistakes." Her mother stared at her for a moment, surprised by her courage. Upstairs, the billionaire remained by his mother's side. He had called every contact he had. He had offered unlimited payment. But deep inside, a painful truth was slowly forming. For the first time in his life, he was facing something he could not control. The night grew deeper. The mansion stayed awake. And in the quiet corners of that grand house, hope felt thinner than ever. Morning came, but it did not bring comfort. The sky outside the mansion was clear and bright, yet inside, the mood remained dark. The billionaire had not left his mother's room. He had changed into fresh clothes, but his face looked pale from lack of sleep. His phone kept buzzing with messages from business partners, but he ignored every single one. The doctors had stayed overnight. Reports were spread across a long glass table in the sitting area near the bedroom. Blood test results, heart readings, brain scans. Everything looked complicated. Everything looked serious. But none of it gave a clear answer. The elderly woman lay still, her breathing supported by oxygen. Her eyes were closed. Sometimes her fingers moved slightly, but no one knew if she was aware of anything around her. Downstairs, the maid prepared tea for the doctors. Her daughter stood beside her, quieter than usual. She had barely slept either. Something about the situation troubled her deeply. When the tray was ready, the girl offered to carry it upstairs. Her mother hesitated but then nodded. "Be careful. Just keep your head down and come back." The girl walked slowly up the staircase. Her heart beat fast, but she did not know why. She knocked gently and entered when one of the nurses opened the door. She placed the tray on the table near the reports. For a brief moment, she glanced at the papers. She could not understand everything, but she noticed certain words repeated several times. Reaction. Unusual response. Unknown cause. She stepped back quickly, not wanting to seem disrespectful. As she turned to leave, she heard two doctors speaking in low voices near the window. "It's strange," one said. "The initial symptoms don't fully match the current condition." "Yes," the other replied. "And her body is not tolerating the last medication well. But without it, her vitals may drop." The girl paused for half a second. Not tolerating the medication well. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the cure becomes the problem. She walked downstairs, her thoughts racing. In the kitchen, she found her mother wiping the counter. "Amy," she whispered, "I think the medicines are making her worse." Her mother froze. "What are you saying?" "I heard the doctors. They are confused. They keep changing medicines. What if her body is reacting badly?" Her mother looked worried. "Don't talk like that. These people studied for years." "I know," the girl said softly. "But sometimes when many people look at something, they only see the big picture. They may miss something small." Her mother stared at her daughter's serious face. She had always known the girl was observant. Even in school, teachers said she asked unusual questions. But this was not a classroom. This was a billionaire's home. "Please," her mother said gently, "do not interfere. We work here. We must know our limits." The girl nodded, but her mind refused to rest. All day, she replayed the doctor's words in her head. She remembered how the elderly woman had complained about dizziness before the heavy treatment started. She remembered the day when she had served her water and noticed a slight rash on her arm. At that time, no one had paid attention. In the afternoon, another discussion took place upstairs. The billionaire listened as the doctors explained that her kidneys were under stress. They suggested increasing the dosage of a strong medicine. He agreed immediately. "Do whatever is needed." The girl, who had come upstairs again with fresh towels, heard this from outside the door. A sudden feeling of fear ran through her. Increase the dosage? Her hands trembled slightly. She imagined her grandmother shaking her head. When the body is already weak, be gentle with it. Without thinking too much, she turned and walked back to the kitchen. "Amy," she said quietly but firmly, "I need to say something." Her mother looked tired. "What now?" "I think they are giving too much medicine. I think her body is reacting badly. The rash, the dizziness, the breathing changes, they all started after the new treatment." Her mother's eyes widened. "Stop. Enough." "No," the girl continued, her voice shaking but determined. "Please listen. Dottie used to tell me about medicine reactions. She saw cases in the village where people became worse because of the wrong dosage." Her mother covered her mouth gently. "Lower your voice." But it was too late. A nurse standing near the hallway had heard part of the conversation. She looked at them with surprise. "What did you just say?" The maid quickly apologized. "Nothing. She is just a child." But the nurse had already become curious. "Come upstairs," she said. The maid's heart pounded. She almost refused, but something in the nurse's tone felt serious. Upstairs, the doctors were still discussing the increased dosage when the nurse spoke softly. "Sir, the maid's daughter thinks the patient might be reacting badly to the medicine." The room went silent. Slowly, every pair of eyes turned toward the girl. The billionaire frowned. "What?" The girl felt her throat go dry. Her mother stood beside her, embarrassed and frightened. "I am sorry," the maid said quickly. "She does not understand." But the billionaire raised his hand slightly, signaling her to stop. He looked directly at the girl. "What did you say?" Her heart was beating so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. I only meant, maybe her body is not tolerating the medicine," she said in a small but steady voice. "Sometimes when the dosage is strong, weak patients react differently." One of the doctors gave a short, almost amused laugh. "This is not a village clinic," he said. "We know what we are doing." The girl lowered her eyes but continued. "I know you are experts. I am not saying you are wrong. I just think maybe you can check if the symptoms became worse after the new medicine started." The room felt tense. The billionaire studied her face. He saw no arrogance there, only concern. "How would you know about this?" he asked. "My grandmother treated people in our village," she replied. "Not with big machines, just by watching carefully. She always said if the body becomes worse after medicine, check the medicine first." The doctors exchanged looks. "This is emotional talk," one said. "Her condition is serious. We cannot rely on guesses." The billionaire felt anger rising inside him. Not at the girl, but at the situation. Every expert had given him complex explanations. None had given him improvement. He turned to the senior doctor. "Can it be possible?" The doctor hesitated. "In rare cases, yes, but we have monitored her closely." "Then monitor again," he said firmly. The doctor looked uncomfortable. "Sir, adjusting treatment without strong evidence. Is there strong evidence that this is working?" The billionaire interrupted. Silence filled the room once more. For the first time in days, he felt something different from helplessness. He felt curiosity. He looked back at the girl. "If we check and you are wrong, nothing changes. But if you are right..." He did not finish the sentence. The doctors reluctantly agreed to review the timeline of symptoms and medication changes. The girl stepped back, her hands cold and slightly shaking. She had never imagined standing in a room full of specialists, speaking about something so serious. Her mother whispered, "You have done enough." But deep inside, the girl felt something stronger than fear. She felt responsibility. Upstairs, the doctors began reviewing charts again, this time more carefully. And for the first time since the illness began, the possibility that something simple had been missed started to enter the room. The room felt different after that moment. No one said it openly, but the air had changed. The doctors were no longer speaking with complete confidence. They were now flipping through reports again, this time more slowly. The billionaire stood with his arms crossed, watching every movement closely. The girl remained near the door, wishing she could disappear, yet unable to leave. Charts were spread out across the table. One doctor compared dates. Another checked the timing of each new medicine that had been introduced. Her fever increased the same day this was added. One of them murmured. "And the rash was noted the following morning," another replied. The senior doctor adjusted his glasses. "But the infection markers were already high before that." "Yes," someone answered. "But they spiked after the dosage change." The billionaire listened carefully. Every small detail now sounded important. He turned toward the girl again. "When did you notice the rash?" he asked. She swallowed nervously. 3 days ago, on her arm. It was light, but it was there." The maid looked down, embarrassed that she had not spoken about it earlier. "I thought it was nothing," she whispered. The senior doctor stood quietly for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "It is possible that her body is reacting badly. At her age, tolerance levels are lower." Another doctor quickly added, "But stopping the medicine suddenly could also be dangerous." The billionaire felt trapped again between two risks. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked. The doctors discussed lowering the dosage instead of increasing it. They also decided to run an urgent allergy response test. Nurses began adjusting equipment. Blood samples were taken again. The girl watched silently. She had not expected things to move this far. She had only wanted them to look again. Minutes felt like hours. The elderly woman's breathing remained weak but steady. The beeping sound of the monitor filled the quiet room. The billionaire slowly walked toward the bed and sat beside his mother. He gently brushed her hair away from her forehead. "Stay strong," he whispered again. He was not used to waiting. His entire life had been built on quick decisions and fast results. Now he could do nothing but sit. After some time, the initial test results came back. "There is a heightened reaction," one doctor said carefully. "It is not extreme, but it is present." The senior doctor nodded slowly. "This confirms sensitivity." The billionaire looked up sharply. "Meaning?" "It means her body is struggling with the current medication," the doctor replied. "We should reduce it immediately." The girl felt a small wave of relief. But the tension was not over. Even after reducing the dosage, the doctors were unsure whether improvement would follow. Damage might already have been done. They warned the billionaire not to expect sudden recovery. Hours passed. The sun began to set again, casting orange light across the room. The maid brought fresh tea, but hardly anyone touched it. The girl stood near the window, staring at the sky. She felt both hopeful and afraid. What if she had spoken too soon? What if lowering the medicine caused something worse? Her mother walked closer to her and whispered, "Whatever happens, you spoke with a clean heart." That gave her a little strength. Suddenly, one of the nurses leaned closer to the monitor. "Her pulse is stabilizing," she said. Everyone turned. The numbers on the screen had changed slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. The senior doctor stepped forward and checked the readings again. "It is improving," he admitted quietly. The billionaire stood up so quickly that his chair moved backward. "Is she better?" he asked. "It is too early to say," the doctor replied, though his tone carried cautious optimism. "But this is a positive sign." For the first time in days, the billionaire allowed himself to breathe a little deeper. Another hour passed. The elderly woman's breathing became more regular. The rash on her arm began to fade slightly. The fever reduced by a small degree. The room felt lighter. One of the younger doctors spoke honestly. "We may have focused too much on fighting the infection aggressively. Her body needed support, not force." The senior doctor did not argue. The billionaire slowly turned toward the girl again. She looked almost surprised by the improvement, as if she had not fully believed it herself. "Come here," he said softly. She hesitated, then stepped closer to the bed. He studied her face carefully. "Why were you so sure?" She shook her head. "I was not sure. I just noticed patterns. My grandmother used to say the body speaks through small signs." He looked at his mother's hand resting in his own. "And we were not listening." The doctors continued monitoring through the night. They adjusted fluids. They reduced additional medications that might cause stress. They focused on stabilizing rather than overpowering. Around midnight, something unexpected happened. The elderly woman's fingers moved more clearly this time. The billionaire leaned forward immediately. "Mother!" Her eyelids trembled slightly. A nurse gasped softly. Slowly, with visible effort, the elderly woman opened her eyes halfway. It lasted only a few seconds before she closed them again. But it was enough. Tears filled the billionaire's eyes. He did not care who saw. "She responded," the nurse said, smiling. The senior doctor checked her vitals again. "Her body is recovering strength." The girl felt warmth spread through her chest. She had never seen such powerful people look so emotional. The maid quietly wiped her own tears. By early morning, the improvement became clearer. The oxygen support was slightly reduced. Her heartbeat remained steady. The fever continued to drop. The billionaire walked out of the room for the first time in 2 days and stood alone in the hallway. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He had built companies from nothing. He had taken financial risks that others feared. But this moment felt bigger than any success he had ever achieved. When he returned inside, he called the doctors together. "I want full transparency," he said calmly. "If something was overlooked, say it." There was a pause. The senior doctor spoke honestly. We treated aggressively because of her age and initial symptoms. In doing so, we may have stressed her system too much. The reaction was subtle at first. The billionaire nodded slowly. He then looked toward the girl and her mother. I almost ignored her, he admitted quietly. The room fell silent again. He walked toward them. You spoke when even trained professionals hesitated, he said to the girl. That takes courage. She lowered her eyes. I was afraid. Fear and courage can exist together, he replied. Inside the bedroom, the elderly woman rested peacefully for the first time in days. The machine still beeped, but now the sound no longer felt like a countdown. Felt like a second chance. And in that large mansion, something important had shifted. Not just in medical treatment, but in understanding. Sometimes wisdom does not come from titles or wealth. Sometimes it comes from simply paying attention. The next morning did not feel like the others. For the first time in many days, the mansion was not filled with silent panic. It was still quiet, but the quiet felt softer. The kind that comes after a storm begins to pass. The elderly woman was still weak, but the sharp danger that had surrounded her condition was slowly fading. The doctors had reduced several strong medications. They focused on gentle support, hydration, and careful monitoring. No one wanted to make another aggressive move. The billionaire had not left her side. But now, instead of staring helplessly at machines, he watched her face. Around mid-morning, her eyelids fluttered again. This time, when she opened her eyes, they stayed open longer. He leaned forward immediately. Mother! Her eyes moved slowly, searching the room. They stopped when they saw him. For a few seconds, confusion passed across her face. Then recognition followed. Her lips moved slightly. He bent closer. I'm here. No machines were needed to tell him that this was real improvement. He could see it in her eyes. A nurse called the doctors inside. They checked her vitals quickly but calmly. Everything remained stable. She is responding well, the senior doctor said. This is a very positive sign. The billionaire felt something heavy lift from his chest. He stepped outside the room and took a long breath. For days, he had felt as if the walls were closing in. Now, for the first time, he felt space around him. Downstairs, the maid and her daughter were finishing their morning tasks when the nurse came down the stairs smiling. She opened her eyes again, the nurse said. The maid placed her hand over her heart. Thank God, she whispered. The girl felt warmth spread through her. But she did not celebrate loudly. She knew recovery was still fragile. Later that afternoon, the doctors requested a full reassessment of her condition. They ran new scans and blood tests to measure the improvement. The results confirmed what everyone was beginning to believe. Her organs were stabilizing. The allergic reaction markers had dropped. Her fever had almost disappeared. One of the younger doctors spoke honestly during the meeting. Reducing the medication stress allowed her body to fight on its own. The senior doctor nodded. We treated the symptoms strongly. We did not fully consider her tolerance level. The billionaire listened quietly. In the past, he would have demanded explanations with anger. He would have pointed fingers. But now, something inside him had softened. He understood that even experts could make mistakes. And he understood something else too. He had almost ignored the one voice that made them look again. That evening, he asked for the girl and her mother to come upstairs. They stood near the doorway, unsure of why they were called. The elderly woman was awake, resting against soft pillows. She looked weak but aware. Mother, the billionaire said gently. This is the girl I told you about. The elderly woman turned her head slowly. Her eyes rested on the girl. There was no pride or distance in her expression. Only kindness. The girl stepped forward nervously. The elderly woman raised her hand slightly. The girl hesitated, then moved closer and held it gently. Her grip was weak, but it was warm. In a soft, broken voice, the elderly woman said, "Thank you." The girl felt tears fill her eyes. "I only spoke what I felt," she replied quietly. The billionaire watched the moment carefully. He had spent years building success, Yet he had never seen something so powerful happen so simply. After a few minutes, the elderly woman grew tired and closed her eyes again. But this time it was normal rest, not unconsciousness. When they stepped back into the hallway, the billionaire turned to the girl. "You changed everything," he said. She shook her head quickly. "No, sir. The doctors helped." "Yes," he agreed. "But you made us look again." He paused, searching for the right words. "For days, I believed money could fix this. I kept calling bigger names, more specialists. I thought strength meant control." He looked down briefly. "But sometimes strength means listening." The maid stood quietly, overwhelmed by the scene. The billionaire continued, "Tell me honestly, were you not afraid?" The girl gave a small smile. "Very afraid." "Then why did you speak?" She thought for a moment. "Because I imagined losing my own mother one day," she said softly. "And I thought, if something small could save her, I would want someone to speak." Those simple words stayed in the hallway long after she finished speaking. Over the next 2 days, the elderly woman improved steadily. She began drinking small amounts of soup. She spoke in short sentences. The oxygen support was reduced further. The doctors visited regularly, but their tone had changed. They were more careful now, more thoughtful. They asked more questions instead of giving immediate instructions. News of her recovery did not reach the outside world. The billionaire made sure of that. For once, he did not want headlines. He wanted peace. One evening, as the sun set behind the hill, he walked alone in the garden. The large fountain in the center reflected golden light. He remembered being a young boy running around that same space when the house was much smaller. His mother would sit on a simple chair and watch him play. She had never cared about luxury. She cared about him. He realized that in chasing success, he had grown used to thinking in big numbers and grand strategies. He had forgotten the power of small details. A rash on the arm, a change in breathing, a teenage girl noticing patterns. Sometimes life turns on small things. When he returned inside, he found his mother sitting upright, supported by pillows, speaking softly with the maid. They were laughing about something simple from years ago. The sound filled the room with warmth. He stood at the door for a moment, watching. He felt grateful not only for her recovery but for the lesson hidden inside it. Later that night, he called a private meeting with the senior doctor. "I appreciate your honesty," he said calmly. "I know this was not easy." The doctor nodded. "Medicine is complex, but humility is important." "Yes," the billionaire replied. "For all of us." Before leaving, the doctor added, "Your mother's recovery was a team effort, but sometimes, fresh eyes make the biggest difference." The billionaire understood exactly what he meant. The next morning, he made a quiet decision. He would not let this moment pass like just another crisis solved. Something had changed inside him, and he knew that change needed to lead somewhere meaningful. Upstairs, the elderly woman slept peacefully. Downstairs, the maid and her daughter prepared to leave for the evening. As they reached the main door, a staff member informed them that the billionaire wanted to see them again the next day. The girl looked at her mother, unsure. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "No, I think you did something right." Outside, the sky was clear and calm. The storm had passed, but its lesson remained. The mansion felt alive again. Not in the loud way it used to during parties or business gatherings, but in a softer, more meaningful way. The curtains were open wide. Sunlight filled the rooms. The heavy smell of medicine had faded. The machines that once surrounded the bed were slowly being removed one by one. The elderly woman was now able to sit by the window for short periods. A light blanket rested on her shoulders, and a cup of warm tea sat on the table beside her. She still looked fragile, but there was color in her face again. The billionaire often sat quietly across from her, just watching. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they did not need to. One afternoon, he helped her walk slowly across the room. Each step was small, but it felt like a victory. "You used to run faster than this?" she said softly with a faint smile. He laughed gently. "And you used to chase me." They both understood that life had given them another chance. But he had not forgotten the reason behind it. The next day, he asked the maid and her daughter to come to his study. The room was large, with tall bookshelves and a heavy wooden desk. It had always been a place where important business decisions were made. Today, the decision was personal. The maid stood near the door, nervous as always when entering that room. Her daughter stood beside her, unsure of what was coming. "Please sit," the billionaire said calmly. They hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chairs. He looked at the girl for a long moment. "I have been thinking," he began. "You did something that many people with degrees and titles could not do. You observed. You questioned. You spoke when it was uncomfortable." She lowered her eyes. "I did not do it for praise," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That is why it matters." He opened a folder on his desk. "I want to support your education," he said. The maid looked confused. "Sir, you have talent," he continued, speaking to the girl. "Not just knowledge but judgment. I would like to pay for your studies. School, college, medical training if that is what you choose. Whatever you need." The room became very still. The girl looked up slowly, unsure she had heard correctly. "Sir, that is too much," her mother said quickly. "We cannot accept such a big favor." He shook his head gently. "It is not a favor. It is an investment in someone who already proved her value." The girl's heart was racing. She had dreamed of studying further. She loved science. She loved understanding how the human body worked. But she also knew how expensive education was. She had never spoken her full dream out loud because it felt too far away. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Because you reminded me of something important," he replied. "Success is not only about money. It is about using what you have to help others." Tears filled the maid's eyes. "We are grateful," she whispered. The girl sat quietly for a moment, thinking carefully. "I will accept," she said finally. "But only if you allow me to earn it." He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Earn it? Yes, I will study hard. I will work honestly. And one day, I will help people who cannot afford treatment." A small smile appeared on his face. "That is exactly what I hoped you would say." From that day forward, everything began to change. The elderly woman continued to recover. Within weeks, she was able to walk slowly in the garden with support. The fresh air strengthened her. She often asked about the girl's studies and encouraged her personally. "Do not let fear stop you," she would say. "Knowledge belongs to those who chase it." The girl studied harder than ever before. She balanced school with helping her mother, but now she carried a new sense of direction. The billionaire arranged for tutors when needed. He ensured she had access to good books and proper guidance. But he did not treat her like charity. He treated her like responsibility. Years passed. The mansion saw many changes, but one thing remained constant. The bond formed during that difficult time. The girl completed her school exams with excellent results. She entered medical college with determination. The journey was not easy. Long nights of study, practical training, difficult exams, moments of doubt. There were times she felt overwhelmed. But every time she felt like giving up, she remembered the quiet beeping of those machines. She remembered the fear in a son's eyes. She remembered the simple lesson her grandmother had taught her. Listen carefully, observe closely, help honestly. The billionaire followed her progress with pride, but never pressure. He had learned that growth cannot be forced. Meanwhile, his mother grew stronger each year. Though age slowed her down, she remained active and mentally sharp. She often told visitors the story of how a young girl had reminded everyone to look again. But she never exaggerated. She would simply say, "Sometimes wisdom comes in small packages." Eventually, the day arrived that felt almost unreal. The girl stood in a graduation gown, holding her medical degree in her hands. The ceremony hall was filled with applause. Her mother sat proudly in the audience. The billionaire and his mother were there too, sitting quietly among other families. When her name was called, she walked across the stage with steady steps. It was not just a personal victory. It was the result of courage, humility, and a second chance. After the ceremony, the elderly woman hugged her tightly. "I knew you would reach here," she said softly. The billionaire stood beside them, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "You have already repaid everything," he told her. But she shook her head. "No," she replied gently. "I am just beginning." Years later, she became known not only for her medical skill, but for her careful approach. She listened to her patients. She asked questions others overlooked. She believed that healing was not just about powerful medicine, but about understanding the whole person. In her clinic, people from different backgrounds came for help. Some were wealthy, many were not. She treated them all the same. One evening, after finishing a long day at work, she received a message from the billionaire. His mother was celebrating another birthday. When she entered the familiar mansion once more, she saw the elderly woman sitting comfortably in the garden, smiling as always. "You see," the old woman said warmly, "we are both still here." They laughed together. The fountain sparkled under the evening lights. The air was calm. The billionaire stood nearby, watching the scene quietly. He had built towers, companies, and wealth beyond measure. But the greatest investment he ever made was not in business. It was in listening to a young voice when it mattered most. And that single decision had changed more than one life. It had created a future built not on pride, but on humility. Not on power, but on compassion. And in the end, that was worth more than anything money could buy.